Today we want to consider Ephesians chapter 2, verses 14 to 16. Because this is a text which is often being used by those who hold that Yeshua abolished the Torah by his death at Calvary. So let's read Ephesians chapter 2, verses 14 to 16. For he is our peace, who has made both one, and has broken down the middle wall of partition between us, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace, and that he might reconcile both unto God in one body by the cross, having slain the enmity thereby. So at face value, I think this verse is confusing. What does Paul say? Millions of people have been and are still being deceived. Ministers and laymen alike have focused on this scripture and fell into a trap, which Peter warned about. They have twisted it to say what it does not say, and are bringing destruction upon themselves unknowingly. Is that a serious statement? To bring yourself unknowingly to destruction? Much of the information in this presentation is taken from a website called TorahSource.com. Peter spoke of our beloved brother Paul and says, as in all his epistles, speaking in them of these things, in which are some things hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned and unstable twist, as they do also the other scriptures unto their own destruction. 2 Peter 3:16. As mentioned, Ephesians 2:14 to 15, actually to 16, is an often used text by those who hold that Yeshua abolished the Torah by his death. Let's make one point very clear, that the verses in Ephesians 2:14 to 16 and also Colossians 2:14 cannot be referring to the sacrificial laws or any other divine laws, for none of these laws were ever against us, nor did they create enmity, but were for the good of the people. The only one that would be talking negative about any of Yahweh's laws has to be Satan. Yeshua did not relegate the law of the truth only the 10 Commandments or only to the first 5 books of the Bible, the writings of Moses, but to all the prophets. So when Yeshua spoke of law, he meant all of Elohim's word. He said, thy word is truth. John 17:17. All of Yahweh's word is the truth, just as his law, Torah, according to Psalm 119, 142. He understood it, yet why don't people who profess to know him understand it also? So let's open our eyes and ears, and by the grace of our Heavenly Father, try to understand it. We know the familiar verses in Matthew 5:17 to 18, where Yeshua said, think not that I am come to destroy the law, meaning the Torah, or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the Torah, till all be fulfilled. When one reads the 2nd chapter of Ephesians 2, it can be seen that the central theme of Paul is the oneness of Jew and Gentile as united in the Messiah. That the Gentiles should be blessed within the scope of the Abrahamic promise was never questioned. What had been left a mystery was a manner in which this blessing would come upon the nations. Verse 18 to 20 of Ephesians 2 says, For through him we both have access by one Spirit unto the Father. Now therefore ye are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of Elohim, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Yeshua HaMashiach himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together groweth unto an holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are builded together for an habitation of Elohim through the Spirit. The method of blessings the Gentiles is emphasized by the words like fellow citizens, fellow heirs, fellow members, fellow partakers. The Gentiles would be blessed not in a separate community, a separate entity, but by being grafted into the ancient community of Yahweh. Both Jews and Gentiles would be wedded into one and thus mutually share the blessings of Elohim. This teaching of the ingrafting of the Gentiles was perhaps the most difficult apostolic doctrine for the new Jewish believers to accept. For centuries the Jewish nation had borne her distinction from the nations and welcomed proselytes who not only embraced the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but willingly became Jews. The apostolic teaching, however, denied that such was ever necessary. Gentile believers were to be accepted as full citizens within the believing community without undergoing the ritual of a proselyte. The issue brought division within the early emerging believers. Some felt that a non-Jew had fewer privileges within the community than a Jew. Some considered full-fledged salvation impossible, apart from becoming a proselyte. And still others refused to fellowship in fullness with the non-Jews of the way. Each of these perspectives was for Paul a different gospel, since union with Messiah was the sole basis of entrance and privilege within the family of God. And this union was a matter of grace, not the works of the Torah. All members had the same position before the Father, because all members were in Messiah. Any activity that taught something different than this was to be cursed. We could assume that each party was sincere in their stand, but grossly influenced by their past upbringing and teachings. The text in Ephesians centers upon this unification of Jew and Gentile in Messiah, but does so from a perspective of the cross. It is the sacrificial death of Messiah that has established the means of unity, for it was by his death that the enmity between Jew and Gentile was destroyed. For Paul, it is clear that the cross not only made atonement for sin, but it also established the basis for blessing the Gentiles by removing all the obstacles to unity with the chosen people. But it did this not by raising the Gentiles to the level of the Jews, for both Jews and Gentiles apart from union with the Messiah are excluded from the blessing of God. Grace, placement in the kingdom, is a matter of Yahweh's grace, and leaves no room for anyone to boast, even the Jews. Biblical grace is not only unmerited favor or mercy or forgiveness, but it is more a change in the human condition, because of a change in the human heart by Yahweh. Many Bible translations and Bible scholars explain grace as simply unmerited favor. However, according to Strong's exhaustive concordance, the main connotation is that grace is a divine influence upon the heart and its reflection in that life. In 21st century language, this means God touches your heart and changes you. When that change is reflected in your life, that is grace. Grace is not divine permission to sin and do as we want, thinking it's all covered by grace anyway. If you're going to sin knowing that you shouldn't, you do not need grace. You need mercy and forgiveness. Grace is in fact a divine power that allows us to think as God thinks. It changes our heart and it heals our hate, anger, hurt, fear, and betrayal. Grace is the power of God that gives us the desire to live right and the ability to do so. It gives us the desire and the ability to please God and point people to Him. Let's remember that the external labels given by the established religious churches or denominations are of no real consequence, for Yahweh is more interested in the heart than in one's pedigree. Yahweh accepts into His family those whose sins have been forgiven by the death of Messiah. The Gentiles have been brought near because the dividing wall that prohibited them from coming near has been broken down through the cross. If Elohim the Father has accepted all who come by faith in Yeshua, then clearly the children ought also to accept each other. So let's look at some other Bible translations of Ephesians 2, 14 to 15 and sometimes 14 to 16. And we have here the New American Standard Bible. For He Himself is our peace, who made both groups into one, and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall, by abolishing in His flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, that in Himself He might make the two into one man, thus establishing peace. Then we go to the New International Version. For He Himself is our peace, who has made the two one, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by abolishing in His flesh the law with its commandments and regulations. His purpose was to create in Himself one new man out of the two, thus making peace. Here's the New Revised Standard Version. For He is our peace, in His flesh He has made both groups into one, and has broken down the dividing wall, that is the hostility between us. He has abolished the law with its commandments and ordinances, that He might create in Himself one new humanity in place of the two, thus making peace. Here we have the Revised English Bible. For He is Himself our peace. Gentiles and Jews, He has made the two one, and in His own body of flesh and blood has broken down the barrier of enmity which separated them. For He annulled the law with its rules and regulations, so as to create out of the two a single new humanity in Himself, thereby making peace. Here is the Jewish New Testament. For He Himself is our shalom. He has made us both one, and has broken down the mitzvah, which divided us by destroying in His own body the enmity occasioned by the Torah, with its commands set forth in the form of ordinances. He did this in order to create in union with Himself from the two groups a single new humanity, and thus make shalom. So taken at face value, when you were reading all these different versions, these translations present the text as a pointed assertion by the Apostle Paul that the Messiah abolished the Mosaic Torah by His sacrificial death, and that the Torah was the instrument, the Torah itself was the instrument of hostility that erected a dividing wall between Jew and Gentile. So when you just read these verses, this is a conclusion you can come to. And that is a conclusion most Christian churches come to and proclaim. The Messiah abolished, did away with the law the Torah. But the question is that correct? Is that true? The difficulty with such an interpretation is twofold. First, it contradicts the clear teaching of Yeshua himself that he did not abolish the written Torah, according to Matthew 5:17-18. And secondly, the written Torah never demanded a wall between Jew and Gentiles. So we have a problem. The dividing wall between Jews and Gentiles was 100% man-made. Ephesians 2:14 is making the plain statement that Yeshua didn't create the wall, but he broke down the dividing wall. The Greek term translated broke down, which can mean to loose, untie, set free, break up, destroy, bring to an end, abolish, or to do away with. Contextually, the abolishing action is viewed as final, as a death. Thus the barrier, whatever the barrier was, is done away forever. Then we have the word katagu, translated as abolished, describing what Yeshua did to the enmity between Jew and Gentile. Usually means to render void, make ineffective, powerless, abolish, wipe out, or set aside, and is used in the context of rendering laws or edicts of no more effect. So that is in verse 15, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one new man, and making peace. The object of the verb to destroy is the dividing wall of the barrier or the middle wall of partition. But the question is, what is that dividing wall? The Jews had actually a physical wall constructed even in the court of the temple, and it physically separated the Gentiles. Yet spiritually, both were cut off from Yahweh, because both were sinners. All have sinned, we read in Romans 3:23. The Sorek is a small wall right before the stairs to go up to the temple. It was meant to keep Gentiles, non-Jews, away from this most holy place. The Sorek was a 5-foot wall on the Temple Mount that kept the Gentiles away from approaching the temple itself. The temple area was considered holy and clean. Gentiles, on the other hand, were considered unrighteous and defiled. Thus, Jews could approach the temple and Gentiles could not. In AD 1871, archaeologists discovered the Sorek inscription. The inscription was written in Greek with this chilling warning: no Gentile may enter within the railing around the sanctuary and within the enclosure. Whosoever should be caught will render himself liable to the death penalty, which will follow. Now here is a stone block from the original Sorek, the middle wall, the temple warning to the Gentiles. However, the wall spoken of by Paul in Ephesians 2:14 could not be the physical dividing wall made out of stone in the second temple, as some commentators have assumed, because, number one, it was still standing at the time Paul wrote Ephesians, and number two, the terminology Paul uses to describe the wall is different than the terms regularly used for that dividing wall in the temple. And you can find that under the website TorahSource.com. And secondly, the Greek term phragmo was used in the first century to identify the oral Torah as a wall or fence around the written Torah, and the Pharisees as builders of the wall. So who was the builder of the dividing wall? It was the Pharisees. Thirdly, aspects of the oral Torah, not the written Torah, laid the foundation for a strict separation between Jew and non-Jew. What we are simply saying is that the dividing wall that was established by Messiah was none other than those rabbinic laws which had enforced a separation between Jew and Gentile in opposition to the written Torah. In fact, the Tanakh gives very clear instruction against erecting barriers to separate Israel from the other nations. And Tanakh is a name used in Judaism for the canon of the Hebrew Bible. The foreigner who desired to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was to be welcomed into the community and treated with the same respect as was given the native born. Here we have a few texts that prove that. The first text we find in Exodus 22:21. It says, "Thou shalt neither vex a stranger, oppress him, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt." In Exodus 23:9, "Thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for ye know the heart of a stranger, seeing ye were strangers in the land of Egypt." Leviticus 19:34, "The stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh your Elohim." Leviticus 25:35, "And if thy brother be waxen poor, and fallen in decay with thee, then thou shalt relieve him, yea, though he be a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with thee." Then we have Deuteronomy 26:12, "When thou hast made an end of tithing all the tithes of thine increase, the third year, which is the year of tithing, and hast given it unto the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that they may eat within thy gates and be filled." So the stranger is also included here. He had the same rights. The stranger were to be given full participation in matters of Torah and Torah life, like Sabbath keeping in Exodus 33:12. It says, 6 days shalt thou do thy work, and on the seventh day thou shalt rest, that thine ox and thine ass may rest, and the son of thy handmaid and the stranger may be refreshed. Then we have Leviticus 19:10, when gleaning the land, "And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am Yahweh, your Elohim." The same applied to justice in Exodus 12:49. "One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you." The same principle applied for the festival and the worship and prayer in the temple. The prophets pronounced judgment upon any who would neglect their God-given responsibilities to the stranger, on the same ground as the neglect of orphans and widows. We read in Jeremiah 22:3, "Thus saith Yahweh, execute ye judgment and righteousness, and deliver the spoil out of the hand of the oppressor, and do no wrong, do no violence to the stranger, the fatherless, nor the widow, neither shed innocent blood in this place." This is what the written Torah, what the law of Moses had to say. The promise that Gentiles could have access to know, love, and treasure Yahweh was spoken of in the Old Testament. Yahweh, speaking through the prophet Hosea, said, "I will call those who were not my people, and her who was not beloved, beloved. And it shall be that in the place where it was said to them, You are not my people, there they shall be called sons of the living Elohim." The claim that Gentiles could have access to know, to love, and to treasure Yahweh was fulfilled through Yeshua. In John 10:16, he says, I have other sheep, which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice, and they will become one flock, with one shepherd. I am the good shepherd. Romans 9:23-24, he made known the riches of his glory upon vessels of mercy, which he prepared beforehand for glory, even us whom he called, not from Jews only, but also from among Gentiles. The reminder that Gentiles could have access to know, to love and treasure Yahweh was re-emphasized through the apostles. Or to put it as clearly as Paul did, in Galatians 3:28, there is neither Jew nor Greek, for you are all one in Messiah. Approaching rabbinic tradition, the practical outworking of the rabbinic laws of purity raised a strong wall of separation between the observant Jew and the non-Jew, even if this was not the original intent. With the emphasis put upon purity by the rabbis, separation from those things that rendered a person unclean was inevitable. When Gentiles were added to the list of those things that communicate uncleanness, the wall was built between Jew and Gentile. According to oral Torah, mere contact with non-Jews could render a person unclean, as well as contact with the residents of a non-Jew or even with land outside the land of Israel. But these were man-made laws. Contact with any object used for idolatrous worship was added to the list of what might render a person unclean. Clearly, the oral Torah of the first century functioned to separate Jew and Gentile in a dramatic way. The law of commandments contained in ordinances, as it said in Ephesians 2:15. The Ephesians text helps us to define the dividing wall with the appositional phrase, the law of commandments contained in ordinances. The question is, did Paul use this phrase to denote those rabbinic laws, which had in fact separated Jew and non-Jew? The first thing to note is that the term dogma is never used in the Septuagint of any of the commandment, judgment, statutes, or laws of which, according to Genesis 26:5, the total written Torah consists. In the Septuagint, dogma normally designates the edicts of a king or court. So the Septuagint is the oldest Greek version of the Jewish Bible. And the word ordinances in Ephesians 2:14-15, as well as in Colossians 2:14, is translated from the Greek word dogma, number G1378, from the base of G1380, a law, civil, ceremonial, or ecclesiastical, decree, ordinances. The noun dogma is found 5 times in the apostolic writings, and we find it in Luke 2:1, Acts 17:7, it is used as Caesar's decrees, while in Acts 16:4 it refers to the apostolic decree formulated at the Jerusalem Council. Therefore, this phrase, according to the Greek, the law of commandments contained in ordinances, is best understood not to refer to the Mosaic Torah, but to the traditions of the fathers, the halakha of the community. So these man-made ordinances, called dogma, prevented the salvation from the extending past Jews and created enmity. This is what was truly contrary and against the Gentiles, preventing them from being brothers in the Messiah. So the study of the word dogma in the Septuagint and apostolic writings confirms that the term was used of man-made laws and not of the Yahweh-given Torah of Sinai. We may therefore conclude that Paul adds it to his description in order to identify the abolished law as a legal fence of the rabbis, particularly the parts of the oral Torah that separated Jew and Gentiles, and thus were at odds with the written Torah that prophesied the unity of Jew and Gentile, all within the promise of blessing given to Abraham. This does not mean that Yeshua abolished the entire oral Torah in his death on the cross. In fact, there are many instances recorded in the life of Yeshua where he gives clear allegiance to oral Torah. We have some example of this in Matthew 9:14 and 15. The argument of Yeshua, in which he defends the manner in which his disciples fast, is based on a recognized halakha that it is improper to fast in the presence of a bridegroom, but this is not found in the written Torah. Matthew 12:5, the teaching which states that the priests break the Sabbath but are innocent is not found in the written Torah, but in the oral Torah. Halakha means Jewish law. It originates from the Aramaic word hilkita, direction of the action, and the Hebrew word holech, from the verb to walk. We combine the meanings. Hilkita and holech gives us halakha, which means this is the way to go. In Matthew 15:1, the Pharisees are inquiring about the disciples of Yeshua. Why do they transgress the traditions of the elders by not washing their hands according to halakha before eating? Yeshua rebukes them, citing also their use of korban to hide their wealth from aging parents who needed their support. In both cases, it is clear that the Pharisees considered the halakha based on oral Torah as binding. There is nothing in the written Torah about giving thanks before eating. Saying the berakah before eating is part of the oral Torah. Another example is Matthew 22:40. Yeshua quotes the Shema and Leviticus 19:18, stating that upon these two precepts hang the law and the prophets. The terminology of the law and prophet hanging from something is derived from the oral Torah. Yeshua knew both the written and the oral Torah. The matter of tithing very small amounts of produce from volunteer seedlings is not taken up in the written Torah, but it is part of the oral Torah. And you can read that in Matthew 23:23. The whole issue of travel on the Sabbath is defined in oral Torah, not in the written Torah. There are no specific prohibitions in the written Torah restricting travel on the Sabbath. The written Torah does not define the dimensions of one's place. It was the oral Torah that developed, for instance, a Sabbath day's journey, as you can see in Matthew 24:20. The written Torah declares that a person is unclean from a corpse if he touches it or is in the same room with it. See Numbers chapter 19:11-15. The Pharisees extended the communication of impurity to any object overshadowed by a corpse, or any part of a corpse, or any object whose shadow contacts a corpse or a tomb. The oral Torah further elaborates the means by which impurity is transmitted from a corpse to an object. It appears that Yeshua accepted at least some of this oral Torah as grounds for its illustration of the Pharisees as concealed tombs in Luke 11:44 that rendered those who overshadowed them unclean. The issue of healing on the Sabbath are part of the oral Torah, to which Yeshua no doubt refers as he asks the question in Luke 6:9. I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath days to do good or to do evil? To save life or to destroy it? We probably could recite many more, like Matthew 26:20, reclining when eating at the Passover meal, which is not prescribed in the written Torah. What law was violated in Acts 23:3 when Paul was struck? The idea that a person was innocent until proven guilty is a function of oral Torah, not of the written Torah. The threefold designation in Acts 25:8, the law of Jews or against the temple or against Caesar, seems to define the three most powerful arms of law. The Pharisees is the laws of the Jews, the Sadducees against the temple, and Rome against Caesar. The only logical conclusion in regard to the oral Torah is that Yeshua abolished those rabbinic laws which, when practiced, set aside the written Torah of Elohim by separating the Jew and Gentile, which Yahweh intended to make one in Messiah. This was the dividing wall, the rabbinic law contained in the ordinances of the oral Torah. Those parts of the oral Torah that affirm the written Torah or are in harmony with it remain viable for the Messianic believer as the traditions of the fathers. Praise Yeshua for breaking down the middle wall of partition between Jews and Gentiles, both physically and spiritually, at great cost to himself, and securing salvation for everyone that believes. Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free man, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Yeshua HaMashiach. As a summary, the middle wall of partition, the dividing wall, what is it? Who made it? How was it broken down? The middle wall of division were man-made ordinances that were part of the oral Torah that prevented the salvation from extending past the Jews and created enmity. This is what was contrary and against the Gentiles, preventing them from being brothers in the Messiah. These man-made laws Paul called the law of commandments contained in ordinances. So those verses in Ephesians 2:14-16 cannot be referring to the sacrificial laws or any other divine laws, for none of these laws were ever against us, nor did they create enmity, but were for the good of the people. These were added man-made laws inspired by Satan. The Messiah broke down that middle wall of partition between Jew and Gentiles by spilling his blood on Calvary. He broke down the wall separating both from Yahweh. Jew and Gentiles are both now one new creation because of what Messiah did. Let's remember Galatians chapter 3, 26-29, and that's from the Aramaic English New Testament. For you are all the children of Elohim by faith in Yeshua, the Messiah. For those who have been immersed in Mashiach have been clothed with Mashiach. For there is neither Jew nor Aramean, nor slave nor free, nor male nor female, but you're all one in Yeshua the HaMashiach. And if you are of Mashiach, then you are seeds of Abraham and inheritors by the promises. The central theme of Paul in Ephesians 2, 14-16 is the oneness of Jew and Gentile, as united in the Messiah by tearing down the man-made wall of partition. Paul is not saying that the Messiah was doing away with any law, ceremonial or moral. I have to repeat it again. He is talking about man-made laws, man-made ordinances. We have those man-made laws and traditions, even today, in all the churches and denominations. And if these man-made laws and traditions are against the Torah, they are against us. And we need to ignore those. May Yahweh help us to understand the situation and stand for truth. May you help us to follow Him and to realize that the Torah, the law of Moses, with the statutes and judgments, are still binding and have not been nailed to the cross.